Have a pleasant day, everyone. Thank you very much for being with our lesson summary once again. For those who have just joined us, by now, this is a lesson summary tackling practical lessons, practical things that you can learn from our Sabbath School lesson quarterly. This week, the title of our Sabbath School quarterly is Love and Justice. Our memory text is found in 1 John 4:20, New King James Version, and it said, if someone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? Wow, this is a very nice verse. Okay. So, for our introduction, love is the summary of God's character. Because as the Bible clarified, this is the greatest of them all. This is the very reason why God gave man the freedom of choice or free will. Now the conflict arises because God, being all-knowing, knows that at some points man can be wrong and he can preempt the commission of mistakes, but he did not due to the element of free will. So, how does love and justice work together? Simple. Number one, we do not love when we actually condone errors. Favoring is never loving. That is why if we love people, it may include pain and discomfort in making them do things correctly. That is why implementing justice is true love because it does not only result to skin deep happiness, but systemic happiness. Number two, justice will prove true love. Usually, love founded in justice will end correctly. Though it may not start comfortably, but it will end correctly. But the end will always justify the means. This is the very reason why Jesus cannot love without being just. And more importantly, Jesus cannot give justice which is not anchored in the idea of love. So, brothers and sisters, we will now start the 5 questions to summarize this week's lesson. Question number 1. Can we love unjustly? Again, can we love unjustly? Love will always focus on the mercy and grace of God, and that is unfathomable. But justice focuses on how we understand the law and how we comply or execute it correctly. God pointed out that it is unlikely and illogical that we can love God without following the laws, specifically the 10 Commandments. Love and justice are two positive words. That is why when one of these becomes negative, it also becomes questionable. Love should always be in the correct direction because loving with a negative intention is not loving at all. Loving with a hidden agenda is not loving at all. Because love will always do what is right and right things are determined with justice. There is this principle in law which says, falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus. So when you started loving and there is no justice within it, there is a great tendency that your love, even how long it is still unjust and it is not love, okay, in a general sense. So, can we love unjustly? Well, no. Love and justice should be in one direction, the right direction, the God-centered direction. Now, let us go to our question number 2. What are the 2 greatest sins? The 2 greatest sins are, number 1, not rightfully loving God, and number 2, not rightfully loving fellow men or neighbors. So how do we love God correctly? The checklist is given by the first 4 contents of the 10 Commandments. You can read that. If we cannot follow that or fall short of that, then the sin against loving God correctly occurs. That is how simple that can be. Then, how do we love our fellow men correctly? Well, the last six contents of the Ten Commandments will be the accurate answer for that. If we allow that, then we have not committed the second greatest sin. Or if we follow that, we will never commit the second greatest sin. But if we have violated it to the slightest, to a fraction of it, then we just committed the sin. Now, most of the contents of the greatest sin among men can be individual in nature or personal in nature, but there is a glaring provision that is being said in Exodus 20, verse 16. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. This is one inclusion in the Ten Commandments that can have a corporate aspect, not only individual, but also corporate. When leaders discreetly or intentionally bear false witness towards their subordinates or co-leaders or people outranking them, that is tantamount to bearing false witness to your neighbor. That is why entitlement as leader does not give premium and limitless authority in terms of the truthfulness that is being uttered to another person. We still need to be responsible of what is the truth with evidence or the truth that we just want them to hear because it benefits us. This will include documentary statements that can put other people down even if it is only half true, or be a part of the people who will not completely tell the truth. And what is the result? Well, this is still included in the provision of the second greatest sin, which is not loving our neighbors correctly as God has modeled. Now, what will happen if we are part of the people who will not completely tell the truth so that they can have a little advantage over another person? Well, that is what we call now as bearing false witness. Simple and clear. Okay? Today, most of our leaders consider position as a warrant to do anything they want to do, including things that are not already truthful and logical, just to get rid of people they don't want. This is nothing short of being qualified as bearing false witness. So let us always examine our actions if we are really for the best interest of God's work, or we are advancing our own interests at the expense of others, which is now a question of truth that will lead to bearing false witnessing, a qualification that will include us in the second greatest sin. Imagine, we are already committing one of the two greatest sins, and we are still unconscious about it. So, what are the two greatest sins, brothers and sisters? Number one, the sin of not loving God according to the first part of the Ten Commandments. And number two, the sin of not loving our fellow men correctly according to the second part of the Ten Commandments. Okay, let us go now to question number three. How did God model in loving justice? God prophesied that there will be abuse of power in this universe, whether it be among nations or among institutions. This will happen because this is one of the signs of the times that the coming of Jesus is almost to happen. God is very clear that there should be justice, and this should be executed by protecting the needy and addressing the needs of the poor. Meaning, the salient purpose why we have a church today is to let the church be an avenue where the rich can share to the poor and the poor can benefit from the rich, and there can be a little sigh of equality. This is justice in the simple sense of the term. Oppression is always a sin that God always pointed out as being done but not noticed. Well, sometimes when leaders oppress us, we call it executive privilege. When leaders oppress us, we call it administrative prerogative. But let us not forget, all our powers and dominions emanate from God, came from God. And God does not want ambiguity in the usage of our powers over other people. So let us be sure that all our actions as leaders will always be for the betterment of the work of the Lord and for the betterment of the lives of our neighbors, as basic as that. God modeled loving justice by correcting oppression. Again, he modeled loving justice by correcting all kinds of oppression. So, how do we oppress God's people? How is oppression done? We can oppress in two ways. First, if we do something that will cause them problem, harm, and negative effect, that is oppression by commission. Second, if we do not do something resulting to the people of God suffering and becoming problematic with results of negative perplexities in their lives, that is oppression by omission. We could have done something, we did not, so they suffered. Okay, again, we can oppress God's people by doing something that can harm them. That is oppression by commission. We can also do something, and we can also oppress God's people by not doing something which could have benefited and blessed them. That is oppression by omission. So if we love justice as God does, it is not enough that we will do only that we. It is not enough that we will not only do wrong. We also need to do right. Again, let me emphasize this one. It is not enough that we will not only do wrong, we also need to do right. In like manner, injustice is not only doing something wrong, it can also happen when we are not doing something that leads to wrongness when we could have done something. So, how did God model loving justice, brothers and sisters? He modeled it by addressing oppression within the individual relationships of his children and the corporate relationships to avoid oppression by commission and omission. Now, okay, let us go to our question number 4. Why was there a call by God to establish correct justice? Well, in the olden times, when, okay, in the olden times, people, when they do something wrong, God will send a messenger in the form of patriarchs, prophets, and even apostles to remind them to do what is justifiable and correct according to the model justice of God. That is where we establish that justice is being done. Today, when the system goes to a direction of executing injustice, there are still people who are called to correct the system, and these are our ministers, our evangelists, and God's messenger of any kind. However, the problem today is even the messengers of God are also greatly tempted to do the injustices that are the main reason why God placed them there in the first place. They are compromised at some points. So when the entrusted person to remind became a factor in the continuity of injustices, then there is really a need to call for justice as there is already a problem we call as cultural injustice. Cultural injustice happen when people are getting used to injustice and it becomes a norm in their system that they cannot distinguish anymore what is justice and injustice, and at some points there can even be a confusion because some will think that the injustice is the true justice, which we know just because acceptable or just because it is acceptable. Okay, it is already called justifiable. Okay. Now, these things become permanent and become cultural because there are no people, no instruments that can correct them as God would have designed it that way. This is now the greatest reason why call for justice is not limited anymore to the chosen few, but rather to the people who are willing to heed God's example and message of correct justice and then display it in their lives and become the lifestyle messenger and mouthpiece of God. Yes, God called for correct justice because humans have the tendency to call what is comfortable and usual as justifiable, which is not the correct measure of justice itself. That is why God's messengers today should renew their commitment to study and implement the biblical principles in, in order for them to apply justice, because this is the only correct and godly way. The Bible is our map. The Bible is our guide. Okay? Well, this may sometimes become hard to follow because of our accepted and comfortable laden culture. I hope you have not experienced this yet when culture interfere and you begin questioning the Bible. This is wrong because we need the Bible to question culture. So, why did God call for establishment of correct justice? It is because justice today can be compromised when the called people themselves may not implement or establish the correct justice God wanted them to spread. Rather, they may be tempted to fail or to feel, that justice is culture and comfort, which is the greatest way to erroneously establish God's justice. Okay, so now we have come to the last question, question number 5. Who is my neighbor? Okay. Every person that can be reached by our message is our neighbor. That is why God is entrusting us with the truth about love and justice so that we can share this with our neighbor. The definition today of this question, who is my neighbor, became more complicated as we know, okay, as we know this as someone, okay, we have the possibility of reaching. That is our neighbor. Thus, the influx of technology today increased the number of people we can call our neighbor. We need to use technology to the advantage of God's work. That is to reach more people, to reach more neighbor. So before, if our neighbor is the people that we can only reach with our message through our manual dispositions, today our responsibilities more, okay, became more intense, higher, because technology is now one of our means to reach our neighbors. And if we know technology and we don't use it correctly to reach our neighbors, then it might be that we are using God's blessing of technology in an anemic way or even in a wrong way. However, a practical reality is it is ironic that some people today plan of preaching to people who lives more kilometers away, shall we say 50 to 100 to 100 kilometers away, but cannot even convince and encourage those, okay, within the 50 to 100 meters radius, okay? Now, without our reach or people who are staying, okay, uh, 50 to 100 meters radius within our reach, or people who are staying outside our churches, outside our institutions, outside our schools, outside our conferences. What an irony it can be. There is a problem when our neighbor who always see us chooses not to see God's love and justice in us and continue to be indifferent to our message. That only means that we may be teaching something different from what we are actually doing in our lifestyle. So, brothers and sisters, how can we illuminate God to people from afar if we cannot let light pass through the hearts of those who live near us, our neighbors? That is the very reason why God said, love your neighbors and establish justice in that relationship. Because if we can let the message go through our neighbors, people from afar will see evidence of our light, and that will be easy for us to reach more and more people, reaching them by lifestyle and example. So, brothers and sisters, who is my neighbor? Who is your neighbor? Well, literally, those who are near you and evangelistically near you and technologically near you. Those people that you have the capacity to reach. Either way, let us always remember to leave the message we bring so that there will be no conflict, okay, in our listeners, okay, in the hearts of our listeners, in the way that they will understand God's love and justice. So, For our conclusion, love and justice will never be inseparable. Oh, love and justice will never be separable. I'm sorry. For if one cannot support the other is weakened and its believability will be questioned. What is lovable should always start as justifiable because there is no true love when there are even just a pinch of injustices in the process of giving love. So, brothers and sisters, this is our short, practical, and complete review of our Sabbath school lesson for this week entitled Love and Justice. Again, this is Sir Nhoie Gonzaga, Prospero Gonzaga Jr., okay? And I'm very happy to be a part of your study of God's Word through the lesson study. Now, we are ready to share what we have learned to our classes in the Sabbath school. God bless everyone.